So horror hasn't been awful this year. After all, 5 out of my top 10 of the year are horror films. And as we're in October, more and more horror films are going to keep coming out. And I just recently saw X and it was really good. I loved Brooklyn 4-5, The Pub's Exorcist, The Blackening, you know, A Haunting in Venice even was okay. So the horror scene hasn't really suffered too much this year. But as a huge fan of the genre, I can't help but always feel like I need more, and not just more, but better, different at the very least. And that's where El Conde comes in. Now, considering I'm not Spanish, I will be referring to this film as The Count for the remainder of this video, since I don't want to continuously obliterate that pronunciation. You might have noticed it in my last Ultimate Horror Movie Madness bracket. It unfortunately came against The Exorcist in round 1, so unfortunately it got booted the hell out of there. But this is a Chilean fantasy horror film from Pablo Larraín, who most famously directed Spencer in 2021 and Jackie in 2016. Following suit to those, this film is also biographical, but a completely fictionalized version of the protagonist's life, and that protagonist being former president of Chile, Augusto Pinochet, or as he's mostly referred to in the story, the Count. And as you watch it, the very first thing you'll likely notice is that the film is shot in black and white, and not in the way that comes off as a filter like say Zack Snyder's Justice League, but this film feels made for black and white. It doesn't feel like a trivial decision, kind of like The Elephant Man. It feels like a bygone era, akin to those early Dracula films or when monster movies were a bit more fantastical in nature. And that black and white nature of the film is more than just a glimpse of nostalgia trying to capture a cinematic feeling that's extinct. It's there to serve another purpose, which is to kind of lessen the gore. Make what's so ugly more palatable, which is really what the film is attempting to do with the characters, or at least what the characters are trying to do with their own story. Now, I'm not sure whether I can show this on YouTube because I just got monetization, so I probably won't show it you, but I'm just going to say that within the very first 5 minutes of this film, during an opening sequence of exquisite exposition, we see a young count bash a French prostitute's head in with a wooden mallet, a huge wooden mallet. It's graphic and the prosthetics and practical effects are gorgeous, and in colour this scene would be Cronenberg style violent, it would be Saw style violent, but with the dramatic orchestra playing with the gorgeous stylization of the film along with its grain and frosty cinematography. It comes across as brutal yet beautiful, like a lion killing a gazelle, a pure representation of nature at work, unrelenting, unfair, and of perfect design. And what's greatest about this intro is that this whole sinister backstory, narrated gorgeously might I add, is that they finally cut to the present day Count, and he's just as we know him later in life. He's just a guy. Not the vampires we're used to in media. He's not suave, he doesn't live in a cool secluded castle. Yes, there's fun visuals like a younger him licking off the guillotine that beheaded Marie Antoinette, but overall everything becomes quite plain and lacking, which is on purpose to show how far he has fallen from that grace, or at least how far he's fallen from power. Because this isn't the story of a high society socialite or a depraved monster. This is a vampire of once political and military clout. He doesn't graciously feed on hot women, he hunts, steals hearts and blends them into smoothies. But don't get me wrong, this guy does have some looks. I mean, look at the drip, and yes, you are seeing correct, he flies now.
They fly now?
Now, in vast contrast to his harrowing imagery, we see a convent of nuns who beam purity, their habits so white compared to the shadowed halls and background. It's small details like this that make this film a cut above the rest, just how these nuns stand out to the story they're overshadowed by. It doesn't seem much and seems like an obvious choice, but if you've seen enough horror films, you know that a lot of them don't attempt even half of this effort when it comes to visuals alone. Like how the camera communicates character motivations and plot development through very simple but well thought out means. For example, when the family arrive by boat to the house in order to inherit their father's hidden wealth and hope for him to die, each of them are given their own establishing shot, Every individual shot is speaking to the character's selfishness and morals. They're there for their own benefit, self-concerned and self-absorbed, but flocking together as a murder of siblings to achieve a common goal. They even walk towards the house separated, like entities that are simply coexisting but are by no means a group. There's another moment where the Count first conversates in private with Carmen, who's here via orders from the church undercover as a French accountant. They shoot this conversation and almost every conversation with this character in entirely medium shots of a single subject at a time. They're in the middle of the frame, opposing each other in every conversation, because as much as the family believe they're all working with Carmen for their own selfish needs, especially the Count, in reality it is Carmen versus them. They never share a frame in a conversation because there's an intentional distance between the characters, an opposing goal. This rule is broken twice. Once when she's interviewing the butler, Theodore, he seems to be the only one she is visually afraid of. She's obviously terrified of his presence, and in their conversation, though it starts the same single subject medium shots, Theodore eventually spills into her frame, his presence invading her space. It's showing his lack of boundaries and care, and it's showing his just general presence, and also that he is not fooled by her. She is well within his reach. The second time they break this rule is to establish the rule actually. Once Carmen is in a faux relationship with the Count, they share a frame until her eventual betrayal where they revert back to the old style. So this rule is there to reveal her true intentions once again. It's a fascinatingly brilliant but simple and powerful use of blocking in every little dance the characters have. Aside from the visuals, I just love some of the ideas the film has, revelations it gives you that are unexpected and unusual, like how the Count is actually the only vampire in the family. He's isolated himself in that way. His wife, though unfaithful, puts blood into his food to keep him alive as she wants him to bite her and turn her, as he's refused to do in the 60 years they've been together. He believes he's given her everything he possibly can, but he won't give her this. Why? Well, actually it's quite poetic, Shakespearean even. Essentially, the wife is having an affair with the butler, a cliche the film is very aware of and comments on. The Count is even aware of it, almost condones it. Also, he falls in love with Carmen and turns her after knowing her after a day or so. At first, this seems like an unusual choice but makes entire sense. See, the butler used to work for the Count and was very much a killer. He lusted for murder, whereas the Count himself lusted for wealth. He was a thief. However, his wife was also a killer. All she seems to fantasize about is being turned and going on a hunt, but Carmen, she's a thief herself. She plans to rob the entire family for the church, so eventually the soulmates meet and the Count turns Carmen and the butler turns the wife. It's a perfect matching of horrors. Another unexpected thread is that the Count is actually willing to die. More than willing really, he's hoping for it. He's grown a regretful, egotistical and honestly pitiful old man. He wants to move on. He even gives away his secret fortune in an effort to clear out his unfinished business, like a ghost trying to move on from purgatory. His life is like his home, buried fortunes in a broken shell. His floors quite literally caved in, his furniture is in the dirt below the floors. But at some point after meeting Carmen, he regains his stride. He admits he knows she's a nun, but he doesn't fear her at all because the devil isn't inside of him. He is the devil in some ways. He's a beast that can't be released from his prison. He goes on a hunt, dripped out again, but this time it's awful. He's sloppy and out of practice, which makes you realize he was not the one on the hunt we saw initially. That was the butler attempting a coup of his own. Then the nun tries to kill the Count, and as she helplessly fails, her glowing white habit turns grey as she falls into his darkness. A simple piece of imagery but very beautiful. Then she gets turned and she goes on her first flight, and it's messy and imperfect but free. It's almost like a dance. There's something pure more about the movement that isn't so clinical like the others we've seen who fly smooth and with purpose. It shows how she's different to Theodore and the Count, and it's at this point I realised that this is the most gorgeous movie I've seen all year. It is visually a treat that never gets old. It's hard to make a fantasy black and white horror film like this without feeling gimmicky, and somehow it does it. It even reveals that Margaret Thatcher has been our narrator the whole time, which should be super goofy, but it isn't. It's played well and lands within the realm of possibility in this world. And she ultimately reveals to us that the Count's riddled with the thing that riddles us all. They're a superior species plagued with human faults like greed, love, ego, and selfishness. And that's just some of the philosophies that this film is presenting. They're also playing with other ideas like how egotists believe they're entitled because somehow having less than others means you're a victim, which it doesn't. It shows us a story where there are no heroes or villains, just perspectives and perceptions. There's a lot of symbolism, like Carmen being beheaded like Marie Antoinette in the beginning but facing upwards, which is an infinitely more terrifying fate than face down. There's also a lot of fantastical elements outside the imagery that I wish contemporary horror was more willing to dive into. Outside Jordan Peele, there aren't many people doing that on a huge scale. And there's a lot to be said about Pinochet being reimagined this way, but I think the point more than anything is people's horrors, decisions, and even inactions outlive them. There's so much going for this movie that unpacking it in this small video is nigh impossible. I didn't even get to the music, which is fantastic. It's mostly heavy brass like a marching band constantly leading us somewhere, but we don't know where. I didn't get into a lot of the plot points or story elements. There's just so much going on story-wise and visually that you need repeat viewings to really appreciate it all. It isn't overtly gory or scary, but it is beautiful, and I think the best horror of the year so far. But that's just me. Have you seen El Conde? What did you think of it? Let me know, and whether it's a black and white fantastical horror fictionalized biography of a former Chilean dictator or not. As always, keep watching movies.